Hello, this is Mark Swanson, and you're listening to the Wall Street Window podcast. In a very few moments, I'm going to have a special guest. I'm going to be speaking with Carmine Savastano, who runs the website tpaak.com, stands for the book Two Princes and a King. But Carmine's coming out with a new book in February called Human Time Bomb, The Violence Within Our Nature. It's about why there's so much discord in today's day and age. And the other week, we talked about an article he did about the origins of violence. And one of the aspects of that is a disgust mechanism. And that's what I'm going to be talking with Carmine about in a few moments. But first, I want to tell you that this is the last podcast for this year. And we're going to be turning the page shortly to not only a new year, but a brand new decade. And every year, I know a lot of people make New Year's resolutions. I don't really do that. What I do is in the final days of the year, I like to kind of have some quiet time and plan ahead for different goals I may have in the next year. And often that's involved things on my website, my businesses, and so forth. But I got to tell you, going into this new year, I'm really not planning on making big changes. Everything is running pretty smoothly and just pretty good, and part of that has to do with the financial markets. We've seen gold begin a new bull run when it broke through 1350 this summer. I'm recording this on Monday, and you're seeing mining stocks just go up. It's quite remarkable. And today, Aftermath Silver is at a new high yet again. Newmont is at a new 52-week high, and they're not the only stocks doing that, and bodes well for what we can expect next year too in the precious metals world. So that's going to continue to be a big focus of mine. And looking for more stocks to buy. I want to find another stock that can have the potential that we've seen in Aftermath Silver, which went from a nickel in June, which is basically when I got in it, and lots of Power Investor members got in it, to where it is now. Talking about a six-fold return in half a year, and we can duplicate that again in more stocks. So that's my real goal. One of them for next year isn't changing my business or the website, but looking for more stocks like that. And beyond that, I am personally going to try to spend less personal time on the internet, whether that's looking at a desktop or cell phones. Really, the cell phones are taking over people's minds. You draw your attention constantly, and it's hard to do projects which require time and thought. And for me, that means writing. I'm planning on finally finishing a book I've been writing about the Vietnam War. Just in the next couple of weeks, I want to have the draft done so to be ready to be released. And then I'm going to move on to another project. So my goal for next year is to really get serious about getting back into writing history books. And the stock market provides me the opportunity to have the time to do it. But in order to use that time wisely, I must disengage myself as much as I can from all this noise that the internet has become. It doesn't mean there isn't some good stuff on the internet. This podcast that you're listening to is being delivered to you by the internet. But for every meaningful piece of content I engage with, I'm probably presented with 1,000 pieces of junk. And you know how it is. We all are living and seeing this ourselves. So all that said, let's get to the discussion with Carmine Savastano, who runs the website tpaak.com and is coming out with a book you can pre-order right now. It's coming out in February, titled Human Time Bomb. recommend that you, in fact, go to Amazon and do that. So one little break and on to Carmine.
Go ahead, caller.
Hey, I'm interested in the truth about the JFK assassination.
Right. Well, what do you want to know?
Judy Baker's wild claim, Oswald girlfriend, she knew Ruby and Barry, cancer weapons. Really?
I imagine I could claim I have 4 wheels. It doesn't make me a wagon, but okay.
Oswald was on the kill team and trying to prevent the murder of John Kennedy. Come on now, has a real expert on the JFK assassination looked into her claims?
Go to Amazon.com, enter Judith Baker in her own words. You'll get results for a digital copy of a book where Walt Brown utilizes her own words and the known evidence in the case to get at, well, a different perspective, let's say. You can get Judith Barry Baker in her own words from the author himself, signed if you request it by contacting Dr. Brown at KIASJFK@AOL.com. It's a fun book, and it actually dissects the many, many fantastic claims. Judith Barry Baker in her own words.
Thank you for all the great information.
Hello, Carmine. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Mike. Good to be back. Hope you had a good holiday.
Yeah, I did. I hope you did too. Heading into a new year, and we spoke about a month ago about an article you put on your website, tpoc.com, and I'm going to link to it with the notes for this podcast. But it was about the origins of violence and studies about what causes people to commit violence, and we talked about fear as being one of those things, but you also have something we didn't speak much about, and that's disgust as causing people to commit violence, and that's an interesting concept.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think often is not considered in why we might get angry or we might get violent with other people. And disgust is something we almost take for granted because it's a natural occurrence, and it might not even occur to us that it has a lingering effect, but it does. We can see disgust. It appears from all the studies and the evidence that I've looked at. It came up originally as a defense mechanism, like fear, as where fear will, where we talked about where your friend realized that he shouldn't drive over that bridge with the 50-foot waves, but another person tried anyway.
Yeah,
so it's a defense mechanism.
They got killed.
Yeah, exactly. Their fear did not serve them well. So with disgust, it's the same thing. It's a defense mechanism, and usually it comes from probably basic things that would disgust almost any average person. Blood, excrement, dead flesh. Things that might be sources of disease can all generate disgust. Bad smells, all those things. Anything you can think of, just off the top of your head that would make your stomach queasy or would make you feel like vomiting is a trigger of the disgust mechanism.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a friend of mine I was talking with. This is he works in an emergency room, and he had someone who came in there dead with they had committed suicide and shot themselves and blew their brains out, and they took this person to the emergency room, and he made a comment basically that you just kind of get used to these sort of things and it doesn't really bother you. But then he said there are the things that do bother him are when people are coming in there and they're diabetic and their feet are rotting away, so to speak, Yeah. And that smells really bad. And I'm just thinking to myself, maybe a reason for that is that if someone is bleeding out, that may not subconsciously seem as dangerous to you to be around as someone rotting away.
Yeah.
Or so you just may think that's more contagious or something.
Well,
or
yeah.
dangerous to be around.
Well, it's interesting that you say contagion, because that's one of the things that our disgust mechanism plays upon, is it operates under this thing called the sympathetic laws of contagion. And it goes along with the thinking that basically if you come into contact with anything that might trigger the disgust mechanism, it's like you're in almost permanent contact with it.
What do you mean
So,
by that?
well, for instance, like your friend who has the problem with people who are rotting and doesn't have the problem with like the dead person whose insides were all over the place that he had to clean up and everything. He might be so detached because he's been exposed, like you said, to it. He's just grown used to it. So up close, viscera and cleaning blood and all that doesn't really bother him anymore. He's done it so many times, it's almost second nature to him. But dealing with probably a more specialized rotting problem, like you said, and the smell, maybe the smell of blood and the other things don't bother him anymore because he's gotten used to them, kind of like someone who works at a trash dump.
Mm-hmm.
You get used to the smell, you get used to the disgustingness of it. But the rotting, the living rotting, the dead material doesn't bother him, but the living rotting does.
Yeah.
Smell to it, and because there's a person, and that's really the disgust mechanism. And maybe it might be. I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist, but it would appear, just from a little bit of information that we've discussed, that maybe he has transferred what the normal disgust mechanism would have been to that. So maybe instead of getting disgusted by blood and viscera and all the things that he's used to, he gets disgusted by living representations of rot.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, another example of this sort of thing, and that I'll let you move on, is that I watched this movie Chernobyl this year, and it shows these radiation victims and pretty awful situation, and it made me read a little bit about how dangerous is radiation actually, try to compare what was in this movie to other things, and I read some articles about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and interestingly enough, most of the people that died actually didn't die from radiation. They were just burned up basically, and a lot of the people that got radiation sickness survived. Most of them did, in fact. But one of the things, though, that links to what you're talking about is that after the hours and days after the atomic bomb blast, the people that were radiated really bad and had radiation burns, they were basically put on the outskirts of the destroyed cities and not taken care of. The Japanese people that came, to help, these people they didn't really want to do much with for several weeks because they never seen anything like it before, and probably this disgust mechanism was being activated in them.
Yeah, most likely it was, and that's, unfortunately, we as humans take a long time, thousands of years to evolve and change maybe different mechanisms within our behavior and within our bodies. But one of the important things that we have to remember is that events don't operate like that. Things are just going to happen in our lives that our biological systems are going to have to somehow make up for quickly. And that's where you're going to get instances like that where people will just be utterly disgusted. They don't know how to deal with it, and they might not be able to help. It's kind of like we were talking about the fight, flight, and freeze. That might be a instance where disgust overcomes them, and they're just helpless. They can't help. They're overridden with, being disgusted.
Mm.
So it's now finally getting much more attention in modern times. Fear has always really been the thing that people have paid attention to over history, but disgust is finally starting to come to the forefront because we can see a lot of, it goes into things as basic as religion. Look at the enduring role of disgust in many of the major religions. There's certain meats you can't eat. There's certain activities you can't have. You can't touch blood. There's certain substances like excrement that are unclean that you can't, are an offense to a religion. So that's actually our biology crafting laws in religion.
Well, how does this translate into other stuff that doesn't have to do with disease?
Well, see, and this is where it gets very tricky. The translation goes into moral disgust, because biological disgust is a defense, and moral disgust can be a defense too, but moral disgust can also lead to aggression and violence, because moral disgust is subjective. Everybody thinks a little bit differently about what qualifies. There are basic things, of course, murder, theft. There are certain universal truths that I think most people are disgusted by. And, we would all agree that they are disgusting activities, thus triggering moral disgust. But moral disgust, you get into the subjective part, and then there's limited facts in some instances, and then people just start to operate off of instinctual feelings. We can see even in ancient times, like you were referring to your friend that works in the medical industry, certain jobs inspire disgust, whether it's a mortician or a coroner or an ER doctor. It's not that people don't like them. They're necessary jobs. We need them. We need them for our society to function. But a lot of times, morticians or coroners are thought of as creepy or have poor connotations associated with them because they're associated with death and with disease and with this, with disgusting things like blood and viscera and excrement.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of like our natural aversion to disease and rotting flesh, and it extends to a moral disgust for disturbing professions. And that humans, unfortunately, we have a tendency to make associations even when there's no logical association to be had. So, and it extends into all sorts of things. Like I said, I think I sent you an article. One of the interesting things is where it extends into even financial arenas, where moral disgust, you see that with companies now trying to appear as if they have some sort of moral ethics, when really we all who are paying attention know that every corporation is based on profit. Whether they want to say they're good people or not, that's fine. But the bottom line is the bottom line. That's ultimately, at the end of the day, why they're all in business. They're not in business to be nice. They're not in business to be ethical. They're in business to make money.
Well, I mean, it's like the Starbucks logo is supposed to make you think they are friendly to the environment or something.
Yeah. When the bottom line is their environmental policy is going to be reflected by what is the most profitable and useful to them, not in actually helping people. If you want to find somebody, you're going to have to go to a nonprofit. If you want to find someone who's actually interested in just helping people, corporations are interested in making money. And it's unfortunate, but a lot of people seem to allow that moral disgust. They allow themselves to be manipulated by moral disgust, with corporations manipulating them, as if some corporation would never do something. Basically, they'd all do whatever they had to make money within the confines of the law, and we often see some beyond the confines of the law. So, but, on that, where people wouldn't think disgust would play in, there's that, but it also plays into subtle things like, counterfeiting. Like the counterfeiting of products and currency can affect the perception of those affected by the practices with a loss of funds or inferior qualities of the product. So, like in the case of imitation products, this can trigger people to actually prefer an imitation over genuine products because of packaging and pricing, and will make people actually buy more dangerous items.
Well, it's like Bitcoin. The funny thing about Bitcoin is people who like it use a symbol. It's a B, and they always make the letter B with a dollar sign through it trying to make you think it's money and gold when it's neither one.
Yeah, when it's not when it's not backed by anything other than the word of the people running it.
Yeah, it's just whatever. So, I mean, it's no different than it's not better than a U.S. dollar, and it's not gold.
It's Disney.
So, yeah, like, okay. but they use that symbol to make you think it's something.
Exactly, because and you know what? It's subtle, and I bet you it works sometimes.
Well, it does when it's going up in value.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Well, and Bitcoin to me, I mean, and I don't want to get too far afield, but Bitcoin to me, in some of the discussions that we've had off air, I look at it as it's kind of, there's a problem, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I've seen, some of the articles I've read, it's just basically a bunch, not a bunch, but an amount of whales, people with huge amounts of Bitcoin that can change the market. And then all the average investors. And then these big people, it's kind of like almost like the stock market in that way, except this has none of the laws of the stock market. This has none of the backing of the Fed. There's no way that you can go and complain to someone and actually get your money back if things go wrong.
Yeah, so it's just totally unregulated. But I guess I'm trying to think of fake things, but there's all kinds of paper currencies, and you can have monopoly money, green stamps. I've got some Confederate bills from the Civil War somewhere, and so
it's all fiat currency. None of it. Unless it's kind of like now that we have gone off of the gold standard in the United States, years and years ago, when people ask what's backing our money, I always say the nuclear standard. That's what we're on now. It is because we have the largest supply of nuclear weapons that our money is accepted everywhere. Because really, that's the only thing backing it. On a dollar to dollar. Anyway, that's another story. But yeah, going back to counterfeiting, like you were saying. So it affects us, like I said, subtly. And what's interesting is that, they've done studies where they can see a quality product that isn't packaged flashy will a lot of times be overlooked for a flashy product that's an imitation. And people will then start to associate, mentally over time that flashy product is better than the quality product. And this reportedly contrarian thinking can infect other parts of their thinking, and then they start to feel if things are genuine or not instead of know that things are genuine or not. And so their values can change. So, and sometimes even if they know it's counterfeit, repeatedly using the counterfeit goods can lead to other unethical behaviors and erode an aversion to future repetition. So, and often widely practiced here's a good example, I think. A widely practiced type of minor online crime that still pervades the internet now is online piracy. And while it does not appear to be a large issue to many people because its advocates are often rich artists or corporations that complain about it, and they only do that because it damages their profit margins, as I said before. And the money lost by such companies, when we think about it, is relatively minor in comparison to the benefit of mass distribution. But the greater cost is hidden not for them, but for the user, according to some of these studies. And it's a consequence agreed to by the very act of taking the item. Beyond the negative legal and financial possibilities, the act of taking something illegally is a moral judgment. It's a decision. It's a decision to steal and ignore the law. And with each new theft, it transforms from merely a few incidents into a habit. And then the habit can become a permanent behavioral fixture. And eventually, greater instances of theft with more danger can appear less problematic. So it normalizes.
Almost kind of spooky if you think about it.
Yeah. You don't even realize you're doing it until you're in it.
I don't want to get into propaganda, but you can. It was like
Same thing. Yeah, you hear something over and over, and it starts to wear you down.
Yeah.
And this is the same.
Even if they know it's not true.
Yeah. Yeah. What was it? I think it was Himmler that said, if you repeat a big enough lie over and over, eventually they'll believe it. But yeah, it's the same with, it's just our behavior. It's what I think you and I were talking about. It's Pavlovian conditioning, basically. It is the process of conditioning ourselves to a behavior. And if we don't stop the conditioning, then it just becomes our normal behavior. But it can affect other things. Like I said with this, it seems like a little thing, not a big deal. Somebody takes a few songs here, they take a movie there, blah, blah, blah. And then it becomes a habit, and they start doing it all the time, and they figure, well, if I can do that, well, what else can I do? And it's not because necessarily they went into it thinking that, hey, how can I continue breaking the law? But you're resetting your baseline. So if your baseline is you don't take things, you're not going to take things. But if your baseline is you take things sometimes, well, maybe you'll take things other times. And then maybe you'll build from, what I mean? I'm not saying that's the way it has to go, but that's the way it will go if we aren't consciously paying attention.
Well, how would you connect this to people committing violence?
Okay. So with disgust, I think it's very easy. Let's go back to religion. With disgust, I mean, think of all the violence that has been taken out on people who are members of other faiths, or people who leave faiths and then get hunted down. That's all disgust. That's all moral disgust. You're breaking the covenant that you have joined. You're betraying the tribe. And, so that's all the religious are. And the same thing in politics. I would say American politics right now is overrun with disgust. Think of all the moral judgments people are making daily in places online about other people that they've never met just because they might have voted for someone they don't like.
Well, I mean, if you try to talk with anyone or any debate on Facebook, it almost always, that's where it leads to at the end.
Yeah. That's all moral disgust gone awry. And it's all subjective. And that's the biggest problem about it, is that there are no set facts if you're having a battle of moral disgust. It's just you're talking about things that emotionally upset you, where you make moral judgments, but you're not even consulting facts to do it. You're just going off of your feelings. And it's dangerous, unfortunately. It's one of the reasons why, we've talked about off air about why I wrote the book and why I'm hoping that it can have some sort of impact to slow some of this down. Because if we're only operating on subjective standards, this can go anywhere. There is no limit to the amount of disgust and violence that can be generated if all this is just it's kind of like in the book 1984, where they would have the daily 3 minutes of hate, where you had to go every day and get your 3 minutes of hate, get in your screaming and hate, and then go back to your business.
Well, we haven't talked about your book in this interview, so I'll just mention you're coming out with a book next year. We're doing this on the 29th. It's coming out in February, but it's available for pre-order right now. Human Time Bomb, The Violence Within Our Nature. And you go into the causes of violence in a comprehensive way that is really really a lot going on. I mean, you talk about a lot of past history, but also current psychology that's happening too.
Yeah, and I am as scary as some of it is. I am hopeful that if we can, start to realize what some of these issues are, we can hopefully start to correct them. But if we're not going to recognize them, then I don't think that we're going to be able to correct them. There's a lot of conflict that is needless, in my opinion, in modern times. It's a lot of generated outrage and conflict that doesn't need to occur. And the only reason, going back to the profitability margin for some of these corporations, I would, I would recommend that people look not just at what some of these outlets are reporting, no matter where they are, left or right, but why they're reporting it and what it serves. And largely it's profit margin. It's not a coincidence that with the advent of more divisive politics, that all these corporations just decided to jump on the bandwagon and fuel it as much as they could. It's profitable to them. We as humans are critical thinkers. Negative stories generate more attention than positive stories. So they went with negative stories. And unfortunately, some channels are just wall-to-wall negative coverage because they know it's going to engage people.
Well, the internet itself, it's gone back. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of things are happening, but one of the things happening is if you look at the news industry itself, and newspapers, when newspapers in the United States really took off, was after the 1830s, and what happened was they were able to mass produce them, and with the railroads and so forth, you could transport them across the country. But really, what happened was the prices. They called it the penny press because it either cost nothing, was free, or cost only a penny. And when these papers were that cheap, all their profits actually came from advertisers, and their primary objective was getting people to want to read these newspapers, not make money from buying them.
Yeah.
So they would use outrageous headlines and probably in a lot of cases make up the stories, and it was like this up until around 1900, when some more serious journalism really started. That's when the muckrakers, so to speak, began, and magazines and journals, and then the newspapers kind of adapted and took out subscriptions and became more serious. But the point is that they were free and cheap, and that's why the headlines are so crazy and hype and so forth. You can, and the internet that's what it is.
Yeah,
it's all free. You get on Facebook, it's free. Go on Drudge Report or anywhere, type Google News, it's all free. So those people creating those headlines, they only make money if you click and go to their website. So
it's the most engaging headline they can come up with.
Yeah, the most, not simply engaging to get your attention, but it has to make you want to click. And sadly, what makes people click is being angered or stirred up or something.
Disgusted.
Disgusted, yeah. The disgust mechanism makes people click. So it's kind of part of what's happening, I believe.
Yeah, no, I agree. It certainly, all that, I think all that is reasonable. And, our defense is being logical, being rational. Our defense is not giving in to the disgust mechanism when it's unjustified.
But it's hard. It's hard to do it when you turn on the internet and you are bombarded with, stories that are going to make you angry, upset, make you want to argue with whoever's sharing them, or tell the person that's posting it, you're right, these people are scum, I agree with you, one way or the other. But in the end, I think what's happening is, if you are bombarded like that, it starts to distort your conception of reality. So I think you almost have to get off of this.
Well, yeah,
as much as you can.
Well, I certainly think we need to regulate ourselves. There needs to be self-regulation. Everybody's talking about how the companies need to be regulated, and in a lot of aspects that I don't disagree, that there are regulations that need to be put in place, that there is too much influence and power in some of these companies. But we cannot count on them to do the right thing. They haven't done it yet. Why would they start now? So we have to do the right thing. We have to limit ourselves And that means cutting off access to the most poisonous parts of the internet for ourselves.
Well, I would suggest that everyone listening to us buy your book, Human Time Bomb, and read that next year, and that will be time they're not on the internet, and they can reflect
Exactly.
Get
your
your
book.
book.
Not a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, no, because I've just touched the news thing is just one aspect of this, and you touch on a lot more in the book for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, and like we discussed in the last episode, if people want to go back and check that out, we talk about how fear drives so many of these markets as well, and drives the sales of some products as well. So this is a lot of the people. This isn't some, they didn't just stumble upon this method. These are tried and true psychological methods. These are things that we've known about humanity in some respects for a long time, and they're using them against us in some respects. So it's up to us to defend ourselves.
Yeah, but you can only do that if you know what's going on.
Yeah.
So, well, maybe that'll be how we close out this year and get ready for next year, armed and ready to be more clear thinking, I think.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can encourage more people to be that way too.
Well, and when we get a chance to come back, we can always touch on status. That's another.
Definitely, that'll be a fun one. Maybe we'll do that next. Well, thanks for taking the time to talk with me and everyone else, and we'll be back next year.
Well, it'll be good to see you then, Mike. Take it easy, and I hope everyone has a good New Year.